You know, I think obviously that's going to be the core issue is how do we look at a deficit in transportation of $2 billion across the state, and we're looking down the road at least $1.5 to $2 billion in Medicaid deficit that we're going to see as a result when stimulus dollars run out. How are we going to fill in that gap? And it's something that's going to take a lot more than just privatizing liquor stores. We're going to, in the talk that we talk about taking money away from the general fund is really disturbing to me. So we have to figure out a way to generate more revenue. And I think all options need to be on the table. I would look at different kinds of, for transportation, for example, hot lanes has been an area that people have talked about. People talk about ways that we can work with VDOT to ferret out the waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, there's a whole lot of different things that we need to look at. Our fuels tax. We need to look at all different sources of revenue. We can't do it with existing resources. We're one of the worst states in the nation in funding for transportation, one of the worst states in environmental funding, the worst states in Medicaid, 41st in education. Where do you cut? Where do you find these savings? And I think we need to be more than just thinking outside the box. We need to find out real ways and real solutions that we can seek additional revenue. And it's hurting business. It's not helping business by having this continuous kicking the can down the road.
Well, as I had mentioned before, and I think we're all agreeing, the budget, closing the budget deficit moving forward is going to be the issue this next session. And there's going to be a lot of trade-offs, and it's not a silver bullet. There are a lot of things to do. Briefly mention again, I do want to privatize the liquor system. That would close about half the budget gap right off the bat, and we don't have to be making cuts in other areas. And like I said before, if anyone wants to look this up, there was a Warner administration commission that recommended doing this and said it would be revenue net neutral in the long run. But there are other things. There have to be reforms to a lot of our programs. First, I think we should be auditing VDOT. It hasn't been done in years. When Washington State did this, we found over $100 million a year in savings. I think a lot of local roads should be decentralized and given control over to local authority. Arlington is the exception to the rule that we control most of our roads already. Most other counties don't. But I also agree with a number of Medicaid reforms. I actually agree with my opponent on what we should be doing with long-term living services. There are a lot of people in nursing homes right now that don't need to be there. They could be in less costly assisted living homes and community care options. But we have to be able to find reforms that change incentives in order to get long-term cost growth under control. And there are also some things that we can do to try to stimulate economic growth. I think we should be accelerating bond issuance for highway construction, moving construction forward while interest rates are low and the state has a AAA bond rating, creating some stimulus. It can be done. We don't need to raise taxes. We need a competitive business environment if we are going to recover, and going to the taxpayer is not going to be a way to get growth back.
Folks, I believe that politicians have the duty to answer a question when it's asked and not skirt around it by asking more questions or just responding in very vague, unimaginative ways without really answering what the person is going to do about this serious policy issue. Now, as I mentioned in my opening, we have an incredibly regressive state tax structure that places the biggest burdens on the shoulders of those least able to afford it. So when we talk about budget gaps, we need to keep that in mind and think about ways of changing the tax structure in a more progressive way. Now, study after study have shown that regressive tax structures never produce enough of a tax base to produce the kind of services that are necessary. So if we're talking about all these great things, Patrick, like universal pre-K and dedicated funding for transportation, we do need to figure out concrete ways of raising revenue. Now, there's a flat tax of 6% on corporations. There's a flat income tax of 9% on individuals, which means that someone working for minimum wage is paying 50% more in his or her tax rate than the wealthiest multi-billion-dollar corporation. Now, under any system of justice and equity, this cannot possibly stand. We need to substantially raise the tax rate on wealthy corporations and wealthy individuals to make sure that they are paying their fair share Otherwise, it's just corporate welfare for them.